we're in chapter 7. Am I right?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, so any questions before we begin? So just to sort of recap, so we had the opening few chapters of the book of Samuel. We get introduced to Samuel. We find out about his birth. We find out about Eli and how he's the priest and his sons aren't doing very well, Hophni and Phinehas. And then we have this battle that takes place between the Philistines and the Israelites, and the Israelites lose, and the ark gets captured. And then right after that happens, or right as that happens, the two sons of Eli end up dying in battle, and then the word gets back to Eli that the ark has been captured, and so he dies, and this leaves Samuel in place. And so then right after this narrative, we get the ark's evangelism tour of Philistines, Philistia, the Philistine area, and we see it going around, and everybody sort of playing hot potato with it. They don't want it, they don't know what to do with it, and so finally they decide to send it back to the Israelite people. They put it on a cart with some cows, and they send it off, and then it gets received there. And so the Israelite people get it back, and some of them start to treat it as a curiosity as well. They open it up, look inside of it, and then there's 70 more victims of the ark at this point. And so then they are playing hot potato with it too. They don't want it, so they send it off to another town. And so that's where our story ends. And if we look at the last line, or verse 7, chapter 7, verse 2, from the last time, it was, from the day the ark was lodged at Kiriath Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. Okay, and so this picks up our story from where we left off, where about 20 years into the future, right after this whole incident has happened with the ark, Samuel is a priest, and so now he's going to be 20 years older.
So it was gone from Israel 20 years?
Say that again?
It was gone from Israel.
No,
not
the ark was gone from Israel for 20 years. 20 years has passed.
Okay.
So the ark is gone from Israel for about 9 months.
Just 9 months?
Yeah, and then it returns, and once it's returned, we're now 20 years into the future in the story. Okay. And so Samuel's 20 years older, and we're going to see several things that are going on here. Okay? All right, so if somebody wouldn't mind reading, again, we're going to be reading fairly large chunks of text here because we're reading big stories going on at one time. So if somebody wouldn't mind reading chapter 7, verses 3 to 17.
And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you're returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only. And he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only. Then Samuel said, gather all Israel at Mizpah, and will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord, and fasted on that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. And when the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. And the people of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, that he may serve us from the hands of the Philistines. So Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a burnt offering to the Lord. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel. But the Lord thundered with a mighty sound that day against the Philistines, and threw them into confusion. And they were defeated before Israel. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far below Bethkar Then Samuel took a stone and set it upon between Mizpah and Shin, and called it Ebenezer. For he said, "Till now the Lord hath helped us." So the Philistines were subdued, and did not again enter the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The cities that the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath. And Israel delivered their territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was peace also between the Israelites and the Amorites. Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life, and he went on a circuit year by year to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all those places. Then he would return to Ramah, for his home was there, and there also he judged Israel, and he built there an altar to the Lord.
And so the time frame of our story here, this just chunk of text that's going on, is probably around 1049. So this is 20 years later, sometime between 1068 and 1049. Samuel comes out. So this is really the first appearance of Samuel since we meet him as a child, right? So he just shows up now. And he starts to speak to the people. And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, we don't really get a whole lot of reasoning behind what's going on here. What's the impetus for this interaction that's happening here? In the verse before that, verse 2, it says all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. And so you get a sense that this is just really a continuation of the book of Judges. You have this cycle of events where everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. There's no king in Israel. And so then God sends in an oppressor, and then all of a sudden the people cry out to God, and God sends a judge to help out. All right, and so this seems to be the action that's taking place here. And so, though we don't get a real sense of exactly what's happening, as we see a little later on, they do ask to be delivered from the hand of the Philistines, and so we get the sense that the Israelites are just suffering under a general oppression of the Philistines at this moment. And so now we've raised up Samuel, and he speaks to the people. And so what do they say? Right? They say they've sinned they've sinned, and so Samuel calls on them to put away their idols. Samuel speaks specifically in verse 2. He says, in verse 3, it says, "And Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Asherah from among you, and direct your heart toward the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hands of the Philistines." All right, and so this seems to be this is what the people are asking for. And so he's telling them, if you're going to do this with all your heart, then you need to put these things away. And so this is really just a reiteration of Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and you see this all over Scripture. Even Jesus says this, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, right? And so he's just calling the people right back to God. Okay, and so verse 4, he says, "So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only." Okay, so just a sort of a aside here. Who are the Baals and who are the Ashtaroth? It's actually a really hard question to answer. And the reason for that is because these gods tended to morph over time in the different cultures that they were a part of. And in part, some of the words are just simply generic words that are used to describe these deities in general. And so the word Baal is really just the word for Lord or Master, right? And so, and you would use this, in fact, we see it in other parts of Scripture just in general. It's never used of God, and so it's just a sort of general term. And different cultures sort of brought these gods in and added to them. And so at a certain point in history, around the time of the Babylonian exile, things become a little bit more concrete. But after you start to move back in history from there, things spread out a little bit, and we're not quite as certain who the Baals and the Ashtaroth are. That said, we do have some general idea, but it's really just general. Baal seems to be some sort of storm god or bringer of rain. And this would be akin to Dagon in the Philistine camp, right? And so very likely these would probably be considered the same god in this, just by a different name in the same pantheon, okay? And so even Rome eventually would do this when they came in. They would just say, oh, your god is Baal? Oh, our chief god is, Jupiter. Zeus is the Greek version of that. Ra is the Egyptian version of that, right? So you've got Baal and Dagon. They're all the same person. And usually in these ancient societies, the chief god was either going to be a god of rain, of the weather of some sort, or fertility. And the reason for this is rather simple, right? Because these are the two most important things in agriculture, right? Whether you're in animal husbandry or growing crops, you're right? You need weather and you need fertility, right? And so that was so those were the gods that you were trying to petition to get things done, all right? And so very likely Baal was a storm god or a bringer of rain, and he was responsible for sustaining the fertility of the crops, the animals, and the people. And so the way that you got the gods to do stuff was you enticed them, and you could entice them in various different ways depending on the god. You gave them gifts and stuff like that. Now this seems very strange to us, and this is their understanding of how the world works, and it was very transactional, the way you dealt with the gods. The gods weren't your friends, they weren't on your side, they were people that you were patrons of, and you went out and you made sure that you were doing the right things so that they would help you out. Right? This is sort of the understanding of what's going on, and this is what's going on around the culture too. So this isn't like new, like this isn't out of place for the Israelites. This is what everybody else is doing. This is what was going on in Egypt before they left Egypt, all right? And so it's going on in the land that they come into. It's going on in all the lands that they went through. This is just the way things are, okay? And so in this, desire to be like everyone else, to be like all the other nations, they've sort of taken a lot of these things, okay? And so that's the Baals, the Ashtaroth, and we actually even know a little bit less about the Ashtaroth. This is probably a female god, the consort of Baal. Some people think that she was a goddess of hunt or the goddess of battle. Think Artemis from the book of Ephesians. Also something perhaps to do with fertility. The one thing we do know for certain is that her the worship item, or the thing that was related to worship of her, was a pole, right? So think totem pole or something like that. And so people would gather around that. You can see just with this little bit of information here how different the Israelites were supposed to be, right? And how much this cultural influence had on them. Okay, and so here at the beginning of this text, we see this verse that says, "So the people of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroth, and they served the Lord only." Okay, so then he gathers all the people at Mizpah, and so if you were to go to Jerusalem and go north, you'll see Gibeah and all of those little towns where the cross section is there. Mizpah is right there, right? It's about halfway between Bethel and Gibeon, about 8 miles. Oh, thank you. Yeah, about 8 miles north of Jerusalem. And so this was a meeting point. The word Mizpah actually means watchtower. And the big key here and this is going to have an impact on the rest of the story, is that this is in the central Benjamin Plateau. And so if you remember, you probably don't remember, but all the way back at our very first class, I mentioned the central Benjamin Plateau, and it's that large flat area just north of Jerusalem where armies would gather, okay? And so he calls everybody into this area. And then we get this little bit of a text here where he talks about the people being repenting. They drew water and they fasted. It's not fully explained what the water being poured out on the ground is all about, but probably just again a sign of repentance, of fasting and giving and not partaking of stuff. They say that they sinned, and then we get this verse where it says that Samuel judged them. All right, and so Samuel is really declared a judge here, and we see him judging Israel. And so Israel is, part of the job of the judge is both to proclaim the law and the gospel. And we see this coming out here in this text. So we see Israel just essentially crying out to God, and Israel and Samuel making a sacrifice and offering up something for their sin. Okay, and so go ahead.
I'm a little confused. I think how large of a geographical area would Samuel be over?
So he's going to judge roughly this whole green area.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now, how much of that is he effectively judging? We're not really certain. That's essentially Israel right now, where the tribes are located. So he is the judge of Israel.
So would the army that went up against the Philistines come from this entire green area?
Yeah, so there's no army per se. These are tribes. These are just separate tribes. They're living out in these areas, and you best describe it as a loose tribal coalition, right? The central piece is going to be the tabernacle where Samuel is. So he's the judge. He's not a king, but for lack of a better terminology, he's going to be the leader under God of the Israelite people. Okay. All right. Okay, and so we have this. Meeting. They come together, and this is the key. The interesting part is where he gathers these people together. Right, he gathers them in the central Benjamin Plateau, and what happens? The Philistines hear that they're gathering up there. Now, understand what this probably looked like to the Philistines, right? So these people, you have them in subjection, and now the tribes are coming together on the central Benjamin Plateau, which is where you gathered your armies for battle, right? And so what did this look like? It looked like the Israelites were getting ready to rebel, okay? And so they march on the people of Israel, and the people are afraid. Now this is interesting because this is in direct contrast to the previous battle, right? So in the previous battle, the Israelites were not afraid, but the Philistines were afraid, right? And so here we have the exact opposite. And so in the last battle, they sought to manipulate God, and now they cry out to him for salvation. And so we have this very different approach to this battle that's about to take place. And so they call out to Samuel to do stuff. He hears them. He sacrifices a nursing lamb. And so the Philistines march up the mountain, and then a loud noise throws the Philistines into confusion. Thunder is often the sign of God going to war, right, in Samuel. We have this a few other times as well. 2 Samuel says this, 2 Samuel 22:14, the Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. He thunders when against those who attack David. And interestingly enough, the Israelites themselves will hear God's voice thunder against them just a few chapters from now. In chapter 12, he says, is it not wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord that he may send thunder and rain, and you shall know and see your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in asking for yourselves a king. So Samuel called upon the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. right? And so thunder is often an indicator that God is at work. We see it even in the New Testament as well. When Jesus is baptized and the voice speaks from heaven, God speaks from heaven. Some of the people there heard it as thunder. Right? So, all right. Okay, and so then, so God thunders, and then the people the Philistines run away, and apparently the Israelites take off after them. And here again, the victory is not given to the people of Israel. Instead, in verse 10, we see that the Philistines were thrown into confusion, and that they were defeated before Israel. Right, and so. Israel's not credited with it. It just happened right before them. Okay? All right, and so they run off, and they chase them all the way to Beth-Kar. It's not clear where Beth-Kar is. It could be Ebenezer, which was the place where the original battle took place, but it's not entirely certain. The word Shen there, so verse 12, Samuel took the stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen. The word Shen there just means tooth, and Ebenezer, and he says, and he called its name Ebenezer. Ebenezer just means stone of help, all right? And so it's possible that the place is actually just the place of the original battle that took place, because...
So what was this stone, what should I picture, what was it?
It's probably just a standing stone. So these are just very large upright stones that they stood up. It's actually not, we're not entirely certain whether they were shaped or formed, because the ones we have are fairly old and weathered. And so they would stand these stones up for their meeting places, or places that to remember different events. Treaties were signed there, stuff like that. So it's clear that the hand of the Lord is against the Philistines, because it says that in verse 13, and the hand of the Lord was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. In fact, from this point forward until Samuel's death, the Philistines would be on the defensive. All right, and so they would not end up back into the land of Israel until after Samuel's death. They would have all sorts of border skirmishes. In fact, the largest one we're going to take a look at here in a few chapters is, of course, David and Goliath, right, in the valley of Elah. All right, but they never actually make it back into Israel until after the death of Saul. So then it has this end of verse 14. It says there was also peace between Israel and the Amorites. So the Amorites is just a generic word for Canaanites. All right, and then we get the last part of this text. It says Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. Right? And he went on a circuit year by year, Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and he judged Israel in all these places. Then he would return to Ramah, for his home was there, and there also he judged Israel, and he built an altar to the Lord. Okay.
I'm picturing that Samuel is rich and is being pampered. So how did he travel from place to place?
Yeah, I don't think he's poor. He is the high priest. Common practice during the day would either be to walk or ride a donkey. There's no horses really at this time. And so he probably is riding a donkey.
Well, I watched a show, The Chosen, and they had the I guess they would be part of the Sanhedrin, but the higher ups, they had them in little carriages.
Yeah, and that's 1,000 years later. So,
Yeah.
so and Rome's influenced them by then. So the Greeks. So yeah. So no, at this time probably, and we have the later on we have David, riding in on a donkey, and that was the king, right? The king's horse, right? So at this time we don't really have horses as a mode of transportation. Chariots exist, but I don't know that we don't really see them in the text at this point. So yeah, my guess is he's either walking or he's riding a donkey. So all right, yeah, he's probably not poor. So he's making this circuit around to judge. So the circuit isn't very big. If you take a look at this map here, you'll see. So starting with Jerusalem, if you go north from Jerusalem, you'll see Michmash and then Bethel. Okay, and so that's the first. Is that the first one on it? Yeah, Bethel is the first one on his circuit. And then if you go to the Dead Sea, so right there where the top of the Dead Sea is, and you go north to Jericho, all right? Gilgal is in the, we don't actually know exactly where Gilgal is, but it's in the area of Jericho. So he's going from Bethel to Gilgal, and then back to Mizpah, which is going to be right in the center of this crossroads just north of Jerusalem. And so he's kind of making this sort of strange triangle around. And Ramah is in that area as well. You notice he's not hitting all of the different places to judge. And so one of two things is probably going on here. He's either subletting, right? He's got sub-judges, which is probably what's happening, and we'll see why that is. Or it's also possible that people are coming to him to be judged for different things. Okay, and so remember, he's acting as king as well. He's sitting in God's place, and so he's going to be making determinations, not just theological, but also between disputes between different people as well, right? Again, he's certainly the judge. He's also the high priest, and so he's responsible for making sacrifices. Okay, so who is Samuel? Let's take a little bit closer look. Let's take a few minutes to take a look at who Samuel is. Okay, again, he's a judge. He's a high priest. He's also one of the great prophets of the Old Testament. In Acts 13:20. Luke says this, all this took about 450 years. So he's referring to the time of the temple being set up. And he says, and after that, he's talking about the Exodus up to the time where the king is about to be in place. And after that, he gave them the judges until Samuel the prophet. All right? Okay? And so he's talking about Samuel being a prophet here. And so he's also certainly a reformer, all right? He's sort of a back to Moses kind of guy, all right? If you want to think of him that way, he's starting this movement to remove all of the idols from Israel as well. And so Samuel is the guy that's centrally located in this sort of renewal or reformation of what Israel has become in the time of Judges. Okay. He's also very clear on the law and the gospel. All right. We see this in 1 Samuel 15. He says, and Samuel said, has the Lord a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. You see this very clear push in Samuel to bring the people back to the Word of God. And so he's a reformer focused on the law and the gospel. And as some commentators put it, he's really just a sort of back to Moses kind of guy. All right, let's get back to the text. Let's get back to what Moses was doing. Okay, in a very real way, Samuel is the second Moses, right? He holds all the three offices that Moses held, right? He is the high priest. He's the judge of Israel, and he's also the prophet as well, right? So he's proclaiming the word of God. He's judging Israel, all right? And he is the one responsible for making sacrifices as well, okay? And we see this in the later prophets as well. Jeremiah, so this is towards the fall of Jerusalem. Jeremiah says this, and the Lord said to me, though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my heart would not turn toward this people. Jeremiah is putting Moses and Samuel in the same boat, right? So both of them are these very prominent people in the history of Israel. Samuel is sort of the embodiment of what judges should be. Now, he's not perfect, as we'll see here in a few moments, but he's the embodiment of what God is looking for as he's the king, and this judge is his voice and how he speaks to the people. Okay. All right, and so he's also one of the great mediators and intercessors for the house of Israel, and in this way, he's a type of Christ. All right, and so when we look back at the people in the Old Testament in particular, where they're all pointing forward to Jesus in some way or another. Probably the big example of this, of course, is David, right? And so the son of David is who everybody is expecting, right? The king of Israel. And so, in a very real way, these people are all types of Christ. In other words, they're doing things that Christ is going to do, right? Although Christ is going to do them better and more perfectly, but they all point in that direction. And so here in Samuel, you have again prophet, priest, and judge / king, right? And so this very much so looks forward to how things are supposed to be working, all right? And so we get this image of Christ in Samuel, okay? This is how things are going on for about 12 years, all right? And we don't actually know that from Scripture. This is given to us in Josephus. Josephus says that Samuel ruled or judged the people of Israel for 12 years. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know. But it was a long time because in verse 1 of chapter 8 it says, when Samuel became old. All right, and so Samuel, what does it mean to be old?
He's asking us.
Yeah.
We can tell him.
800 years is old.
Yeah, so we don't get a very clear reference of what it means to be old, right? And so Samuel is, he's probably maybe 20 and that's being like generous because he might be younger, right? So maybe he's 20 at the time of the battle with the Philistines where they lost the ark, right? And so then he's 40 when this starts, and then he's 52. That's old. I'm 52. All right. So we don't have a real.
As far as the timing, I may have this confused.
Okay, got it.
Is Samuel who Saul wanted to hear from when?
Yes. With the witch of Endor?
Yeah.
Yeah, he is. So Saul dies. I'm sorry, Samuel dies before the end of this book. So I hope I didn't spoil anything.
Yeah, so that always confuses me. Why would I could see why Saul would want guidance, but why would Samuel respond to Saul?
Yeah, that's a good question, and so we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get there. But here's the thing: we don't actually know that was Samuel. So it could be Samuel. So it could be a demon pretending to be Samuel. Either way, he doesn't have good news for Saul.
Yeah.
So it's not really it's not really clear. We do have we have clear word that the spirits of the dead can't talk to us. All right. Now, can God make exceptions? Sure. God can do whatever God wants to do, and so maybe in this particular moment, he said, "Samuel, go talk to this fool." Right? Maybe he did that, or maybe a demon was talking to him. Right? We don't know. And so, but yeah, he clearly was no longer trusting in God at that point, and so he was looking for supernatural guidance from somewhere else, and it didn't work out for him. So, okay, all right, and so we have the end of this chapter here. Essentially, there's a large gap between chapter 7 and 8, and in this chapter, or at the end of this chapter, essentially Israel has restored its borders from the time of the beginning of the book of Samuel, and now it has relative peace, and we have a judge in the land, and he is judging everything that's going on. Okay? And so then, now that takes us to chapter 8, and I think, how much of this do we have to read at one time? Okay, good. Oh, this one's the one with sections. All right. All right. So Okay, so let's start with chapter 8, and we're going to read verses 1 to 9. Somebody wouldn't mind reading that.
When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned again aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done. From the day I brought them out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. You said through 8.
Oh, to 9, I'm sorry.
To 9, I'm sorry. And then obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them.
He makes his sons judges over Israel. So this goes back to us talking about how he was judging Israel at this time. It does seem like he's got sort of sub-judges running around here. And if you look at the map, Beersheba, we pointed this out the other day, the last time we looked, but Beersheba is all the way at the bottom of the map. So he's got his sons all the way down there at the bottom of the map, okay? All right, and so it does seem that that Samuel has tried to set up some sort of judicial dynasty here, and this is not something that God has commanded him to do. That is to establish, some sort of ongoing lineage that's going to rule or judge over Israel. Okay, Samuel is actually the only judge in the Old Testament to try this. It was offered to Gideon earlier in the book of Judges, and he refuses it. Okay, but Samuel tries it apparently, but as we can see, it doesn't really work out. And it's interesting because Samuel's sons' names, Joel, which means Yahweh is God, and Abijah, which means my father is Yahweh, are nothing like God, right? Okay, and so they're actually more like Eli's sons, and they pervert justice, and they took bribes. Okay? All right, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures real quick, kind of just give you an idea of how this whole concept of judging takes place in a city during this time. All right, so this is a model of Beersheba. The yellow are the walls of the city. All right, so this is rebuilt city. So this is actually at the time of Samuel. And so if you look right in this area, you see the walls. You see the gate here? So you got this is the green wall here is the outer gate, and the inner wall is yellow. And well, what happened is that during this time you had these, the way the gates were set up is you had this outer gate, and so if the bad guys broke through the outer gate, they'd have to rush into this courtyard and then make immediate left turn, right? And so they're in this kind of kill zone where we're going to have people raining stuff down on top of them. And then so then the inner gate was the one that was to the right of it with the two towers there, right in this area, okay? And then off to the side over here is an area where people would judge. And so this whole area is going to be filled with stuff, people loitering about. This is where the meetings of the city took place at this time, was in the gate. So you'll read this in scripture, you'll see they all met at the gate for some reason. Okay, and so in the gate area is where where all of the important business of the city took place. And that's where the judging took place as well, okay? All right, and so this is the same city. This is the real city outside of there, and it's been leveled. All the walls are gone, but over here, right, this is the gate that you saw on the inside, and this is that sharp turn right there that they would have had to make. And so they would come in and then make a right turn here. And this area right here that's been rebuilt, that is the area where the judges would sit, right? That's where the business of the city would take place, okay? And that's what that looks like. So you have the stone seats in there, and then there would be a wall in the back, and it would look prettier and plastered and all that, but this is rebuilt. This is actually Beersheba, and this is where Samuel's sons would have been judging, right? And so here's a picture of one of those corrupt judges sitting there with his hand out. And that's how the judging took place during this time frame. And afterwards, when you had a king, you still had judges in the gates, and they were just representatives of the king or the city, and that's where all the business took place. Okay. Okay, so again, we've got these two judges, but they perverted justice. They're just like Eli's sons. And apparently the situation is so alarming that the people come to Samuel. They don't want to be ruled by these two crooked sons, right? And so Samuel has set up this sort of judicial dynasty, and they don't want them to be taking over for them because they're not good people. So they come to Samuel and they complain about it. But notice what they say, right? What do they ask for? Behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a judge, or a king to judge us like all the nations. Okay? And so again, here it is. They want to be like all of the other nations. One of the things that we have to remember in the back of our minds is that what the Israelites are asking for in a very human and secular sense is not unrealistic, right? What God is asking them to do is trust in Him, and what they're seeing around them is this weak and loose coalition of sinful people trying to band together to protect themselves from all of these things outside of them. And God is calling them to trust in Him. And they're struggling to do that, right? And so when they see this, they're going, you know what? All of these people, they have a king, and the king can muster all of these resources, and he can get this army together, right? And he can fight our battles for us, right? In fact, this is exactly what they're going to say here in a few verses, right? We want this king to come together and fight our wars for us, okay? And so this is what they're looking for. All right, and again, it's not unrealistic, if you wanted to change, from these loose coalitions of tribes, you got to have some sort of centralized leader or government to draw them all together, right? And that's what they're looking for. Okay, of course, this displeases Samuel, and that's what the text says. Now, it needs to be understood, too, Samuel sees this as a rejection of himself, right? Because he is, in fact, judging Israel, and they're asking for someone else to do this in his place, all right? He talks to God, and God says, no, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, but they're rejecting me. And here's kind of the reality. God is giving them what they want, in large part, or at least in part, because they have already become like the other nations. They've already rejected God. And so God is just doing the thing that is natural. He's giving them the king that they want because they are already like the other nations. Okay, God lets them have what they want, but tells Samuel to warn them about what they're asking for. Luther says this about this text. He says, their sin was not their desire to have a king, for after all, God gave them one, but rather that they set their trust on human help and government when they should have trusted in God alone. This was a grave sin. Okay? And so what they're really doing is saying, yeah, we don't really want to just trust in you. What we want is this king guy who's going to be able to bring us this security that we need in our lives. Okay? It should be noted too that God anticipated this a long time ago. All right, all the way back during the Exodus. He says this in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses writes, "When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must acquire many horses for himself and cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again." And so there he's talking about how the land is going to go back under the yoke of the king. All right? And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, now he's giving limitations for the king, nor shall he acquire himself excessive silver or gold. And when he sits on the throne of the king, he shall write for himself a book, a copy of this law approved by the Levitical priest, and it shall be with him, and he shall read it in all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of his law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted above his brothers, that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. And so that's Moses, right, giving these giving this prophecy about how the king is going to come into the land and what's going to happen, and then he gives rules for it. Of course, as we're going to see as the books play out, this all falls away, and Israel ends up doing whatever they want to do anyway. Okay. The big thing here, the big question in this particular text, of course, is this, and that is putting things before God. All right, putting our trust in other things before God. And this, I think, has a very, very real application in our modern world, because what is it that Israel's trusting in? Politics, right? That's what they're trusting in above all things else, right? They want a king, and a king is nothing other than politics. All right, so we're going to move on. We're going to get Samuel's warning to the Israelites. So if somebody wouldn't mind reading verses 10 to 22.
So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots, and to be his horsemen, and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and some to plow his ground, and some to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war, and the implement of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. You will take a tenth of your flocks, and ye shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, "No, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles." And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Obey their voice and make them a king." Samuel then said to the men of Israel, "Go every man to his city."
All right. I love this section of text. It's because it's so apropos for today. All right. So Samuel gives the people God's words, and he tells them all about what the king is going to do. And what is the king going to do? 6 times. What does it say? He will take. 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 All right. What's he going to take? He's going to take your sons, your daughters, your taxes. He's going to take lots of stuff. Big government is coming your way.
That does sound familiar, doesn't it?
That is exactly what Samuel is saying here. He says, okay. Essentially what he's talking about here is government taxation. All right, so in a variety of different ways, he's telling him how this is going to play out and very specifically.
But they're only taking 2%.
Yeah, but remember, that's a good point, right? Remember, but this is 10% in addition to the 10% you're paying to the temple already, right? So you're not going to stop supporting the temple, right? In addition, you're doing 10% to this other guy too, right? So all of these things have to be paid for. They're not free. You want the big army to go fight off the Philistines? It costs money, right? And oh, by the way, the king, he doesn't live in Motel 6, right? He's in the Ritz-Carlton. Okay? I mean, that's just how it is, right? In fact, let's look. So, just some of the things that he talks about: perfumes, cooks, bakers. These are luxury items, right? These are not just the staples of modern the world, right? These are perfumers, right? So these are the people who create all the nice smells for the for the king, right? You've got cooks and bakers, luxury items. He's got the government there, the commanders of thousands, the 50s, right? These are titles of people who are going to be ruling the armies and running the show, okay? And so the people here, they see just simply they see the positive side, but Samuel is laying out the negative side as well. And then there's 2 pieces here that are sort of strange. Verse 17, yes, at verse 17, he'll take 1/10 of your flocks and you shall be his slaves, right? Here we have the people of Israel who were just, taken out of Egypt, right? Several hundred years earlier, they have the memory of this, and here they are going to go back into slavery under a king. Yeah, but it's our king. Right? And then there's another interesting verse in here, verse 15. It says, He will take the tenth of your grain of your vineyards and give it to his officers and his servants. The interesting part here is not, it doesn't come out actually in the English translation here because they don't use the right word. But the word officers here is eunuchs. Okay? And so it is likely that these are probably not Israelites. And the reason for that is because if they were, they would be excluded from the congregation because they're eunuchs, right? They're no longer clean. They're no longer a part of the community anymore. And so what does this mean? So this king, he gets these eunuchs, right, to do the different administrative tasks of the kingdom, and this was rather common even amongst the Israelite kings. You would hire these eunuchs in. A lot of times they're foreigners. But what this really means is what happens, right? He will take the 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to the officers and his servants. He's going to be giving the land to the foreigners. This was an inheritance of Israel, right? So he's taking the inheritance of Israel and he's giving it away.
So,
Right?
pardon me, but what's the definition of a eunuch?
Someone who has been castrated.
Okay.
So the one of the primary reasons that they were castrated was because they worked in the palace and there was there would be no risk of them around the queen or the harem. Samuel lays out all of these bad things that are going to happen, and the people refuse to listen. And interestingly enough, within 2 generations, the government gets super oppressive, right? And so when Solomon dies, the taxes are super high. And then when his sons come into power, they argue with each other, and one of them says, hey, you know what? You thought my dad was bad. I'm gonna make things even worse for you, right?
Just show you what bad.
What's that?
Just show you what bad is.
That's exactly right. And so within 2 generations, all right, things start to fall apart. And so big government just can't help itself, all right? It wants more and more and more, okay? All right, and so, and this is where we get the little text there. He says, he warns them, and then they say, and this is the last half of verse 19, he says, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and do what? Go out before us and fight our battles. Right? That's really, really what they were looking for, right? They want this guy to go out there, all right, and protect them and fight for them, okay? All right, Samuel repeats their words back to them, and it's like, this is what you want, and God says, okay, and so Samuel says, all right, fine, so he sends them all home, all right, and this is, and then we'll get into the next section, the next chapter will get us into the appointing of Saul as the king. So. All right, sort of the big theological question that's going to come out of all of this next text is that God sometimes gives people what they want, even if it's not for their own good, all right? But he always ends up using it to bring about good. And so even though them wanting this king was not a good thing because of the reason they wanted it, God ends up using it to bring about Christ, right? So through David's lineage, we end up with Jesus Christ, right? And so in the end, God works it all out for everyone's good.